Okay, welcome to another edition of the Edlow podcast. Subscribe. Let's say it four times this time just to break up the monotony. I am here. This is another exciting one for me. I say that every time, but this is really great because we have someone with quite the inspirational story. We have a former, still an athlete, right? You still consider yourself an athlete?
I try occasionally. I'm playing in a celebrity softball game next week in Dallas, so I guess I'm trying.
Okay, great. And also seven-time Emmy Award-winning sports broadcaster Dave Stevens. Mr. Stevens, thanks for joining the Edlow podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so for those who don't know you and can't see on the video, people would be surprised to know that you are a congenital amputee.
Correct. Yeah, let's see if this old athlete can do it. But I was born without legs, so I don't have any legs, and I decided that I didn't want my disability to be who I was defined, and so I turned my disability into my ability and started playing sports at a young age, which people we didn't have the internet in those days, so people don't really know my story, but I was kind of a pioneer in certain aspects of sports, and it really led me to a magical life, which I still to this day can't believe that some of the things I've been able to do.
Well, and that's what's so interesting. I think the thing that really drew me to wanting to interview you was the fact that a lot of people, these days, a lot of people would look at something like even just a mental health disorder or a struggle or maybe a learning disability and say, well, I can't do things. And I think people probably, you mentioned, let's start with young age. How old were you when you started playing sports?
Well, I mean, my story is pretty fascinating. Born without legs, strike one. Put up for adoption at birth. My mother gave me away, never even saw me, so strike two. And then adopted by a loving couple, a World War II veteran and a housewife that were much older. And they instilled in me that I could do anything that I wanted to do in my life, despite not having legs. So I went to school, and around fifth or sixth grade, when everybody at recess and PE are playing sports, I'm like, well, man, I think I could do that. So little by little, I started adapting, and my friends started playing with me and playing with a Nerf football and playing with a tennis ball with a baseball glove and trying to learn how to play sports without legs. There was no book for dummies without legs back then. So I kind of had to evolve and figure out what worked well for me. And the biggest thing for me was not being that last kid picked for sports. And as I inched my way up that ladder, not being the worst kid and not being the fat kid and not being the nerd kid, more suddenly I got to be making the picks. And so I turned my disability into a blessing and started playing football and baseball and wrestling at the high school level. I'm the only guy, only three-sport legless athlete in the history of sports. Took it to the college level. I'm the only legless guy to play college sports and college football. And then I played minor league baseball for the St. Paul Saints in 1996. So I know your listeners and viewers are probably going, well, how? And there's no way. And it's all out there on YouTube. You can see it. Yeah, it's been a great run. And I love teaching empathy instead of sympathy, so people realize that those of us that have those challenges with seen and unseen disabilities, we have a worth, we have a value. Maybe it's our mind, maybe it's certain abilities that we have that others don't. And I think in our society in this day and age, we should be using and tapping into every resource that we can to figure out the best ways. So you shouldn't have to carry a backpack up a hill and go to training in an army situation. If you could have that mind to develop our technologies for air defense and missiles and things like that. So I think this world really, we worry about race sometimes, and I think those with disabilities kind of get thrown in the back, and we don't always get to have parades and huge rallies and everybody trying to get us jobs and fighting for our rights. So little by little, I've just tried to go out there and do my thing and kind of lead by example.
So I want to go back to a couple of things you said. Let's start back with, you said, I want people to lead with empathy rather than sympathy. Tell me what you meant by that.
Because when people see somebody with a disability, I get it every day of my life. They feel sorry for you. They automatically want to open that door or help you. Or when they see me getting my wheelchair in and out, it's like, oh, can I help you? And while I do appreciate those, they're immediately judging that I've had this horrible setback, and that, they just, again, looking at that, judging that book by its cover rather than looking at the contents of the book. And so that's the same way in the job force and in the workforce. When I was the first person with a disability to work at ESPN. Managers didn't know how to treat me. Were they supposed to be, oh, we got to be careful, he doesn't have legs, and he's, or, were they going to be harder on me? And for me, I realized that those of us that have a disability that are working in the workforce have to work 10 times harder than the most, because, again, the expectations are low if you have a disability, I think, in some respects. So I worked my butt off to get where I got in local TV in Minnesota, and then 20 years at ESPN. And I take pride knowing that these Emmys behind me aren't participation trophies, or they weren't given to me for they feel sorry for me. But I think, to get to your point of the empathy over sympathy, I think if people could just realize that those of us with disabilities do have value, and our votes count just as much as everybody else in an election year, yet they don't cater to our needs. You don't hear politicians talking about, let's get more jobs for the disabled. Let's not tax their benefits. Let's not let them have a minimum income level if they are on disability, because you're at a poverty level anyway. Why can't you make more than $1,300 a month if you're on disability? So that's what I'd like to teach.
You think the reason why that is because maybe the disability lobby isn't as strong as maybe some of the other minority lobbies?
I think because we're the biggest minority in the world and we have the smallest voice. But the problem is you're lumping all of our disabilities into one big melting pot. If you're deaf, you're blind, if you have spina bifida, you've had an amputation, we're just all thrown in together. If you're black, you're black. If you're Muslim, you're Muslim. If you're Hispanic, that's what you are. But in the world of the handicap, as a minority, we throw everybody in together, but everybody has different interests. Everyone has different needs. I don't need closed captioning. I don't need Braille. Those are all those things. But when we're lumped into everything, it's tough to get those rights, because some people might have a completely debilitating wheelchair issue. And, how do I help them, and how can others help them? So it's kind of a weird mishmash melting pot of everybody, the most diverse you can possibly have. And the fact that we now count, unseen disabilities of ADHD and PTSD and all of these other things, if you're on the spectrum for autism or those kind of things. So we're just kind of all thrown together without any individuality.
Yeah. And then it's hard to have one strong message when everybody wants different things.
Yeah.
That makes sense. The other thing I wanted to ask you was, you mentioned, you were lucky. Well, a couple of things coming out of this. One, you mentioned that, you were given up for adoption, and then you were adopted by a couple where your father was a World War II vet. And a couple of things. One, did you ever get a chance to meet your mom or know her story? And then two, what effect, that they call that generation the greatest generation for a reason. I want you to tell me what you think, the fact that he was a World War II vet and of that generation, how that shaped you as a person.
Well, let's stay on the happy note for the first part. Yeah, my dad, he served a couple of tours. He got hurt, he got wounded, and they moved him from Germany to Japan in those days. If you could, walk, they'd put you back out there. And he didn't like to talk about it much, but he fought for this country, and he also, never held me back. He instilled in me that I could try to do anything that I wanted to do, and that it was better to try and fail than to sit around in 20 years wishing I had asked that girl out or shot for that job or tried to be the lead in the school play or something like that. So, it meant so much. And the sad part is they were so much older that they couldn't do things with me like normal parents, which gave me freedom in a certain thing, because then I went out with my friends. I would skateboard on my arms miles and miles away from my house to go visit people in that day and age when it was kind of safe. And sadly, my adoptive mother died the day I left for college, and my dad died a year and a half later for cancer. So I lost my two biggest support units within a year and a half, and I turned to cocaine for like a year, which I don't like, I don't brag about it. It was just a horrible low point in my life, but I was able to overcome that. I have been sober since January of 1987. But I learned a lot from that. And to get to the birth mother situation, there was a TV show on TLC called Finding Lost Parents or something. They found out about my story. they contacted me and said, Dave, this is an amazing story, what you've done, what you've overcome. We want to find your parents. So I remember they did a DNA test. I was working at the Super Bowl in Minnesota, and I think it was 2018. They flew out to Minnesota, did a DNA test because they wanted to move on this thing fast. A few weeks later, I'm at home, and I get a call, and they're like, we've got good news and bad news. The bad news is, well, depends on how you look at it. We found your parents, but they don't want to do the show. However, your mother does want to speak to you, and we have your father. So I talked to my mother. It was kind of a weird, awkward situation, but we talked for a while. Then we met like a month later in DC, and we met one other time 2 years ago at the Super Bowl in San Francisco. But and then my dad, I talked to for 22 minutes, and he said, "Oh, you sound like a really nice kid. Yeah, maybe I'll get to know you. We'll stay in touch." About an hour later, I got a cease and desist letter saying, "Don't contact us, don't bother us, never ever reach out to us." So you don't always get those Hollywood endings that you wish for, because I always dreamed, oh, my parents, maybe they saw me on That's Incredible, maybe they saw me on national news, and they'd be proud knowing that I overcame so much. And then recently, I talked to my mother, I texted my mother, and my mother sent me a text just before Mother's Day, and I said, Mom, I'm doing a baseball camp out in San Francisco, I'd like to see you. And I got a note that she said she just can't deal with me being in her life, and she feels so much guilt over what happened to me in my life. And so to get rejected twice in your life by your parents, I should probably be in therapy because of it, just because it really messed me up. My father really messed me up, because I got a text. I sent him a text on Father's Day, like 3 weeks after the cease and desist. Just said, Happy Father's Day, maybe you'll reconsider. He responded with, you need to go on Dr. Phil. You need help. You need to realize you're a mistake and you shouldn't even be here. So those are the kind of things that you never expect a human being to say, or a mother to reject you twice in life. But I'm so lucky I did have my adoptive parents that really made me who I am today.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear that story. I kind of through osmosis identify a little bit with that. My father has a very similar story with regard to his parents. It wasn't adopted, but he kind of didn't really know his father very well. Ended up living with his grandparents and only saw him a few times in his life, and the responses were kind of the same. And I saw the effect it had on him. So I can definitely, he never did therapy either. He just kind of dealt with it. And he also, he went a little bit longer than you with regard to some drug use for that, and he's been sober since 98, I think it was 98. Wow, and so awesome. Yeah, so I mean, definitely it's a lot of your story I'm definitely identifying with, so,
and it's not something I'm proud of. I don't talk about it a lot unless I'm asked, but it also gives me a sense of, when I do talk and speak, I have been there. I have been to those lowest points where I turn to abuse, and sometimes I was sitting in a jacuzzi at 2:00 in the morning, coked out of my brain, holding my breath underwater for up to 2 minutes at a time, almost sometimes 3 minutes. And I wasn't really trying to commit suicide. It's just, that's what I was doing. And I remember I popped up out of the water with this epiphany, and I looked up into the skies, and I'm like, God, if my parents see me now, they'd be so disappointed. All my coaches that believed in me, and here I am, this thing. So I got out of that tub right then and there. I got my scholarship back. I went back to Minnesota, got my TV job back, and played college football, and I never looked back.
So going back to the college football, what position did you play?
I was nose guard, and that's what I played in high school. And I also held for the extra points. I played nose tackle and sometimes defensive end. And I really had a lot of times people don't think about it, but I had a lot of advantages because, offensive linemen don't know how to block a dude without legs. And so after a while, I'm getting through, and I'm rolling and doing my rolls and getting there and causing havoc in the backfield. And the next thing you know, they're double teaming me. They're pancaking me and falling on top, which frees up the linebacker to fill up, so there are a lot of these, kind of cool things that I was able to do. In wrestling, same thing. I know what to do against you leggies. You guys without legs don't know what to do against a guy with no legs.
Yeah. So you can't ankle pick a guy with no legs.
So you got to, there were advantages. And then what my coaches told me, which is very, I guess, a cool thing, is, when I started beating out people to start in right field in baseball, and the starting, 98 pounder in wrestling, and, starting nose tackle, is when those parents came to the coaches and said, well, why isn't my kid starting or playing? There's a guy without legs playing ahead of him. And the coaches would have to turn to them and go, well, your kid sucks. It was plain and simple. It wasn't my disability. It was my ability to, to that extent. So I've overcome a lot, and I can, I can sympathize with a lot of people when I speak and talk, and that's why I think why I got so close to Darryl Strawberry when I played for the St. Paul Saints, is he was going through what he was going through at the time, and we shared a really good bond, and we're still friends to this day, and I'm glad he's a minister and he's overcome all his demons. So you can beat those things when God hands us the worst crappy hand you can possibly get, but if you don't have those support systems, you don't always succeed.
Yeah. So tell me, what do you think it was? There's character. I find that there's similar characteristics for people who are successful. It just seems like people who are going to be successful are going to be successful despite what they're going through. What do you think, if you're looking at yourself and doing a little bit of self-reflection, what do you think are the characteristics that you had that made you successful when, anybody isn't, let alone people with, who are congenital amputees? What do you think those characteristics were?
I think, almost to your point of the business approach, is I every time someone said I can't to me, that I couldn't, that just I'm like, I'm going to find a way to do it. And that's a lot in the business world. You don't take no for that answer. So I never took no and took can't. Like I said, I figured out how I could, catch a baseball and push my hand up with one arm and grab the ball up in the air in the other, and figure out how to throw and how to run on my arms and do all those things. And then in life, I wore artificial legs in life, in the business world. I didn't wear them when I play sports, but, I'm on crutches carrying all that dead weight around because I felt like I had to be up with you guys amongst my peers to be accepted, which I now look back and think, totally. But again, I live in your world. You don't live in mine. It's not a very wheelchair friendly world for anybody that's in a chair. And those challenges I've learned in the last 10 years. But again, I figure out ways to do the things in the chair that I couldn't do or others can't do, ways to carry things. Or someone says, well, how do you get your groceries in? How do you do this things? It's like, a lot of times I'll just put a bunch of stuff in my shirt and close up my mouth, and I can walk on my arms and carry stuff. It's the things that, it's almost like that monkey. You leave a monkey in a room and he's going to figure out tools, how to build things, and, use the stick to get the ants out of the anthill and stuff like that. So I've always evolved, and I'm constantly thinking, okay, how can I do this? How can I overcome this? Same for driving, same for, traveling, I travel a lot for speaking and charity. And it's like, getting on a plane, getting off a plane, all those kind of things that I have to deal with that I can do. And that's why I try to champion the cause for those that can't.
Yeah. It's interesting what you said, because I actually was just recently listening to an interview that I think Tom Segura and Bert Kreischer did with Dana White. And he said a lot of the same things that you just said, which is, and I'm somewhat the same way. I always loved it when someone told me I wasn't going to be able to make it. I wasn't going to be able to do something. It was just, it fueled me. It makes, and that's what he said. He said, anytime someone tells him he's crazy and he's not going to make it, it fuels him, and he just wants to prove him wrong so bad. And I've noticed that with a lot of successful people. And it's interesting because you see a lot of people who are afraid of rejection like that. How would you say that, is there a way that you think that someone can develop that kind of attitude?
It's one of those things. It's your self-esteem, it's your confidence, and if it's low, and if you're hurting it sometimes, I don't know if they can find it, and I've always been able to, no matter how low I've been, I'm always like, all right, what do I do to get out of this? What do I do? When I got let go at ESPN in 2015 with 500 other people, I'm like, what am I going to do with my life? What am I going to do? I don't have legs. I can't just go work at a Walmart. I can't go do this. And then I'm like, well, okay, maybe I should become a motivational speaker, which led to me being in front of the camera and doing things now that I dreamt of. I'm interviewing Aaron Rodgers. I'm at the World Series. I'm at the Super Bowl. I'm doing all these amazing things now at age 58. Again, because I still have that drive. And I think if you lose that drive or that zest, sometimes it's tough to get back.
Mhm.
But like I said, I was born this way. I don't know any other way. I didn't lose a limb. I didn't have an accident. I don't have anything to compare it to. So I'm okay. Like I said, I figured out how to be a dummy playing sports and do those kind of things. It's those that have lost a limb in war or an accident or diabetes or things like that. That really it's a mental challenge. But for the success stories, it's the same thing in business. You've got to want to achieve. You can't take no for an answer. Sometimes you've got to go with your gut and go against the guidance of the instincts that someone else might say, oh, you can't do that, or you should do it this way. I wouldn't be where I am today if I didn't have the determination. And I'm not a hero. I don't look at myself as a role model. I'm just a guy that found a way to overcome his disability with sports.
Yeah, it's so interesting because these things that we're talking about, these characteristics, it's not like an IQ thing. I mean, it's like anybody literally, it feels like anybody could have them, but so few people achieve them. You've talked a little bit about, God, faith. Tell me what role you think faith has in your ability to achieve.
In a weird way, I look at my situation as a blessing.
Mm,
I look at it as a gift because if I'd have been born with legs, who's to know? Would I have been a garbage man? Would I have been a ballerina? Like I don't know. But because of the way I am, you know, how many able-bodied people can say they tried out for the Dallas Cowboys, the Cincinnati Reds, the Minnesota Twins, played in the same outfield with Barry Bonds at the Olympic tryouts,
mhm.
travel and play football in Ireland and all the litany of I feel narcissistic, telling my timetable of life. But I I've always looked at it as a gift, and I think that faith has really been a big part of that. I could have sat around feeling sorry for myself and be in a Walmart parking lot with a tin can, asking people for money and handouts. But I don't know, you know any other way. And
Yeah.
I'm hoping that's with the 20 years I have left, I can continue to inspire and motivate and put on baseball camps for disabled kids, but also leading by that example, as we talked about earlier. Every moment of my life, people are staring at me because you don't see a guy without legs in public much. I mean, we see little things and stuff, but in my case, when I'm so mobile, or if I'm with my three sons or all those kind of things, that it's that shock value where people, they're just, it's just not an everyday thing. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
But it was early in my life when I said, if they're going to stare at me, I might as well give them a show. So I've tried to give people the best damn show that they could see and go, wow, that guy did this. He can play sports. He can go out and do these kind of things. And then if he could do that without legs, what's holding me back? What's holding you back? What's holding everybody back? What's your excuse? I'm not complaining about my ankles and my hips and my legs and all those kind of things. But every day I wake up, I've got torn rotator cuffs. My shoulders are dead. They hurt.
Mhm.
I don't get around like I used to in the videos that you've seen, and I'm aging and I'm changing the way that I have to do things in life of, climbing up on a stool to cook and hopping from stool to stool and trying to, do all these kind of things that I used to take for granted myself. And so those are the new challenges that I have ahead of me.
Yeah. So, um, now, when you're going out and you're speaking with other people with disabilities, what do you find to be the biggest factor in do you find that a lot of people with disabilities have your same view, or do you think that they tend to kind of have a defeatist attitude?
I think it's kind of 50-50 because, there are people out there who have it way worse off than me that are way more inspirational. There's a motivational speaker out there with no arms and no legs, Nick Vukovic, I think,
Mhm.
Vujicic.
Mhm.
And so you see those and you're like, "Oh, what am I complaining about?" Me personally, if I had to get around, in that way. And so I love speaking at the schools, at the middle schools, the where you can actually change their minds and give them a thought. So again, if they're seeing a guy without legs on stage, it's awkward, but wow, he's got cool things to say, and I can associate with being bullied, and I can associate with being picked on, and I can associate with being different, and we all become kind of that same thing, and everybody sees a piece of me in them, and they can kind of hopefully take that away. That's why I love talking to the kids. college kids, and even in businesses. I was just at the Century 21 conference in Las Vegas. And again, you think telling your story is old hat when I do it, but then suddenly people come up and they're crying and they're moved and they want to talk about, I have an uncle like this, I have a grandma like this, I have this, and it spurs. There are so many people out there with some amazing stories, and that's why, being able to tell my story with a narrative that if you work hard enough in life and give everything you've got, you can achieve greatness.
Yeah. That's you mentioned something really interesting, and that is, in the 80s and 90s, bullying was pretty rampant. And, and we're not talking like cyberbullying, like in your face,
Physical, yeah, do
physical
bad
bullying.
things. I witnessed it in my high school, and and while a lot of that went away, it's almost to a point now. It's almost worse because you can cyberbully people anonymously. You can pick on them. I had a case in point. I had literally just interviewed Rob Gronkowski inside of Foxborough. We had this great long interview, and the Patriots took pictures and tweeted it. Immediately, that blew up viral of Gronk and this Legless guy, and then these horrible, nasty comments that are coming up on there about me. And my sons are in school, and my son Brady calls me, "Dad, you're trending." And I'm like, "What's trending?" And he goes, "Well, you've gone viral, and everybody are saying these horrible things about you." And I'm like, "Well, Brady, are they true?" "No, but they're saying them." And I'm like, "Well, that's the world we live in, where people can try to bash, have anonymous profiles and do all these kind of things." And that's why I'm hoping, the problem with bullies is, when they've been picked on, so they're always looking for that weakest person to pick on to feel better about themselves, if it's their parents or some older brother or sister or other people. And that's the problem, is that cycle is so tough to end, that we don't work to help those bullies, to fix those bullies. And then suddenly now in our lifetime, those bullies end up going into schools and shooting people. Like we've got to fix that at a lower level. So that's why, if I can speak to these schools and open up some eyes and open up some ears and conversations, and then they go home and talk to their parents and talk about these things and discuss it, and they realize that people with disabilities are okay to be around. I had a woman in a Target last year, a year ago this October. She's pushing her daughter in a shopping cart out of the Walmart. And the little girl looks at me and she's like, "Oh, mommy, look at that man with no legs." And the mother, without missing a beat, says, "Yes, dear, isn't that scary?" So now that daughter is programmed that people with disabilities are scary or afraid, or, and every time I see that or hear that, I go up to them, I shake their hand, or I talk to the kid, and they want to ask questions. "How'd you lose your legs? Why do you walk like that? Why do you do that?" And I try to make it real, so they realize that we are not freaks, that we are not oddities of society, that we are, people just like they are.
Yeah. Was there a point where you, because of your disability, was bullied? And then when did that, I'm sure let me back up and ask this. When did people start noticing that, like, you being on well, let me start back and say it this way. Maybe this is a better way to put it. I bet at first, when you started playing sports, people kind of looked at you as somewhat of a novelty. And then suddenly people realized you were actually really good.
Yeah.
When did that change for you?
It changed about my sophomore year, when we're in this small little cowboy town, and word got out about this legendary Legless guy. And then ABC came with a TV show called That's Incredible to my high school. And in those days, there were 3 networks and PBS. So the 40 million people saw my story that night. And I was on the same episode with a little 5-year-old kid named Tiger Woods. So that was a pretty cool episode.
Yeah, right.
But then, then it became where, when I was like, "Oh, let's go out and see this thing." And I remember one time we were, my senior year, we were playing our rival in Parker, Arizona. And I came up to bat with the bases loaded. And, I did walk a lot. Obviously, I have a low strike zone. But this big, heavy set guy in the stands, and picture a guy pushing 200 to 300 pounds, wearing a wife beater, white T-shirt with yellow armpit stains and chest hair just overflowing. And he starts screaming, "This guy's a freak. He's a midget. This is just low rent baseball. He should be banned. He shouldn't be allowed to play." And he's screaming this stuff relentlessly. And this is an adult at a high school game, right? And so I look over and I'm just shaking. I'm physically shaken because of this guy. And I watch all the parents just slide away from this guy on the bleachers. And he continues this relentless, like, it's cheap baseball. He should be banned. He shouldn't be allowed. This is a joke. He's a midget. He's not up there to get a hit, And I look at my coach and I'm like, what do I do? And he's like, get in the batter's box. So I get in the batter's box and the guy is still just chirping away, and I'm blocking him out. And so I take that first pitch and boom, it was in the dirt as they usually were. But that second pitch was right at my head, right where I liked it. And I crushed that ball to the outfield. 3 runners come around to score. I get to first base and I turn and I scream at that guy. That's what I'm here for. You bleep, 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 bleep. You don't have to bleep those out because I could use it. So I think great moment. I shut the guy up right. My baseball coach comes running across the field. Stevens, get your butt in the dugout. And I'm like, but coach, I just drove in 3. I did what I was supposed to do. He goes, get your butt in the dugout. So I go in the dugout. He puts in a pinch runner, and I'm sitting there going, oh, what? He goes, I want you to know I'm proud of you. But when you got to first base and you started screaming at that guy, you became that bully. You projected your feelings of what he did to you on the next weakest thing. And instead of having a beautiful moment, I became this a-hole. And so then these parents are seeing what just transpired. And he said something I live to this day: always walk the talk, always act like you've been there. So after that, when I heard things, when coaches tried to have me banned in wrestling because I wasn't wearing wrestling shoes, stuff like that. It just, that day, that moment, it really sunk in that, yes, I am a little different and people are going to say that, those kind of things. So I get the stares. We still hear them when we're in the stores. Look at that man. You hear those things. My sons and I have made it a game. We can hear the weirdest one, or did you catch that guy looking at me, or look at that guy, dad, staring at you, or the drive-bys or stuff, but if you can't laugh at yourself, you shouldn't be able to make fun of others. And I make fun of myself more than anybody.
Yeah. It's so interesting how, isn't it fascinating how being good at sports changes your whole trajectory?
Yeah.
There's something about being an athlete and being competitive that, it's no coincidence that competitive athletes end up also doing really well in business a lot of the time. It's just interesting.
And I saw the, firsthand. I was asked to go to try out for the Olympic baseball team in 1983. And we're talking about in Arizona with Will Clark, Mark McGuire, Barry Bonds, Odubie McDowell, and Dave Stevens. And so here I am in the outfield. Odubie McDowell is in left, Barry's in center, and I'm in right. And we were playing a live scrimmage, and the 2 batters hit back-to-back balls to me. And I made 2 of the greatest catches of my life, just diving and making these great catches. And Odubie McDowell just fell in love with me, and he was at Arizona State at the time. So was Barry Bonds. They were in college before Barry went to the majors. And Odubie comes over and he goes, hey, we got to go to the other field for the hitting stuff. You want a piggyback ride? I'm like, oh, man, that would be great, because a lot of times instead of walking, my teammates would put me on their back and kind of carry me and save wear and tear on my arms. So Odubie picks me up and we start walking, and then Barry starts walking by us, and he's like, Odubie, why are you wasting your energy and time, man? He's not going to make the team. He's no good to us. Put him down. Don't waste your energy, man. He's not a player. And I'm like, you can put me down. I don't want to come between teammates. And he's like, man, that's just Barry being Barry. He's an ass. And I'll never forget that, because I saw, what developed in his career, and the accusations of steroids and all those kind of things. And again, somebody who had those tools, and unlike you and I, that would work hard, and he there were many in that era that did it as well. But it just goes to show you that everybody doesn't like people with disabilities, or is uncomfortable around disabilities, or has different thoughts about people with disabilities being in society.
Yeah, that's just Barry Bonds being a dick. I'm a Giants fan. Being here in Sacramento, that's my team. I watched him play for years. Fascinating basketball player, baseball player. But man, he was such a prick.
Yes, that's the problem. Like, I've seen a lot of these guys, and why do you have to be
unnecessarily mean.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 He's not embraced by baseball. It's not like we love him and want him at our, you'll see him pop up at a Giants game, but it's always the whispers and the talk and all those kind of
Yeah.
things. And that's why you're hoping a guy like Otani can break those records, that we don't have the blemishes that we had from those eras.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because I sometimes wonder if Barry Bonds was a nicer guy, if that would have changed the view of him because he was such a jerk. You know what I mean? And I mean there were stories of guys. I remember one where guy hit a home run, or he hit a home run. Guy caught it, and he was going to give it back to Barry, and he's like, "Yeah, I'll give it back to him. I just want to meet him." And he goes, "Okay," and he hands him the ball, and he goes, "Hey, can I get a picture?" No. And just takes off. And it's just kind of like, come on, man. You know what I mean? Just kind of a jerk. But, when you're a Giants fan, you're just grateful for all those home runs.
Yeah, yeah. Well, of course.
Yeah, especially now when they ain't doing so good.
I do hope that baseball wises up someday and puts him and McGuire and those guys in the Hall because everybody did it that era. So the Clemenses and all these guys, that's just, baseball, that Willie Mays and those guys, they were doing uppers and downers and that stuff in the 60s and LSD in the 70s. And everybody's always looking for that edge. And when you're playing 162 games a year plus spring training, it takes its toll on its body. So sometimes they need supplements. I'm glad that they're easing up on the use of cannabis, for treatment and letting the body recover and those kind of things. So,
I agree with you on that because, even though, yes, it was the steroid era and yes, he did do them and it's pretty clear. I don't think you can say anybody ever played the game as well as he did. He didn't. The thing that stinks about that is he didn't need it. You know what I mean? He was good before he did it. And would he have broken the home run record? Maybe not, but he would have been considered one of the best, if not the best.
And he probably would have played longer because he was kind of kicked out of baseball. Like he probably could have played a couple more seasons,
Sure.
It was just like, look, we just needed this to go away for a while and clean up baseball. But if we're talking about that, well, it all starts with Pete Rose. Pete Rose, Hall of Fame.
Yeah, absolutely.
All the other stuff that we've let go by, it's like his is lame compared to everything else.
Now you won 7 Emmys. You've worked with ESPN. You work in sports. Is there a sport you like to cover the most?
I enjoy covering baseball.
Okay.
I really like talking to those guys and doing interviews with them. I was just recently out at a Dodgers Diamondbacks series and got to talk to Dave Roberts, and he was such a personable guy, just a good guy. And we talked 10 minutes after the interview. I really like that, and what I like to do my interviews, I like to do my homework. I was with Torey Lovello, the manager of the Diamondbacks, and we're sitting down. I'm like, so Torey, tell me what life was like as a kid because your dad invented hee-haw. And he was blown away that I had done my research to find out his dad invented this old country and Western TV show for your older listeners out there. And he had, Willie Nelson and Roy Clark and Buck Owens at his birthday parties. And we talked about that. Next thing you know, he's giving me a cell phone and we're staying in touch. So I really enjoy baseball. Football probably second.
Yeah.
But the challenges of football is the wheelchair on the field. And then when I do interviews, if you ever go into a post-game locker room with the pads all over everything, like they're not really accommodating. I've never understood why we should go into locker rooms and see naked men anyway. Like, I just don't get why we're allowed to do that. Why has that ever evolved? And it's uncomfortable. I remember being in there and seeing, talking to Jason Kelsey, and you got a big old naked lineman in the Phillies, his teammates next to him. And I was like, how did this evolve where we need to get that information so quick that we got to see them naked and do the interviews without clothes and, and the double standard. We aren't going into WNBA locker rooms, so why are we continuing, and I think football is really pushing, the Players Association is pushing to eliminate that kind of locker room access.
Interesting. Did you have do you have somebody who's been your favorite interview?
Oh, wow. There's two. Gronk is always great. We just have fun when we get together. But JB Smoove, comedian JB Smoove.
Yeah.
Just a personable guy. And after the interview, again, we became friends and we talk. And for your listeners and viewers, he's an actor that was on Curb Your Enthusiasm. He's in every ad, it seems like, on TV. But a comedian, talented guy. But there are so many. Aaron Rodgers, and like I said, I've been so lucky the last 8 years since I left ESPN to get access to these guys. But I like doing a lot of the interviews when they're not the stars, when it's a kid who's overcome something, or talking to Senator Tammy Duckworth, who lost her legs, and talking to her about what she's overcome and serving her country, and now being a senator and giving back and helping the world of the disabled. I would love to interview a president someday, not one of the candidates currently, but a future president.
Right.
Or past one like Obama or something like that. I get a wish list. I would like to get Tiger Woods, because I'd love to come full circle of here he was in the green room, and he was chipping golf balls, and he was chipping them off my fake legs. He kept hitting my fake legs, and the balls are bouncing off my leg. And I turned and looked at his dad, and I was like, you going to stop this kid? And his dad said, Tiger, stop doing that. So I didn't know who Tiger Woods was. I just, it's a great episode. If you ever want to see it on YouTube, of Tiger Woods on That's Incredible, this little 5-year-old golf phenom. But I'd love to interview him and talk to him. I take a Howard Stern approach in a way to my interviews, much like you do your research, you can get in depth with them. And like I said, knowing about Tori Lavello's dad and things like that, it's, yes, Howard does talk penises and boobies and stuff like that. But he's evolved into a really good interviewer. And I listen to his shows, and I hear people like Lady Gaga and Barbara Streisand, and people that I look at differently once I hear their story, much like your viewers are listening to mine.
Yeah. So like with your story, you do a lot of motivational speaking. Do you do a lot? You mentioned you do a lot of schools. I'm assuming you do a lot do you do some to like disability groups and things like that too?
Well, I'm a big part of a lot of the disabled world. I work for the Disability Channel doing television and stuff. I am a big part of the Abilities Expo, which is a traveling, it's kind of like a boat and trade show for the disabled world. And I go there and I do crazy features and I get in some of the equipment that they're using and the robotics and stuff, and I do funny stuff like that. And I put on sports camps for disabled kids, so I'm constantly around those things. I work with Runway of Dreams to help adaptive fashion for the disabled world. I'm on the board of Easter Seals, so I am a part of so many worlds, and people can watch my things on all the social media and YouTube and all those kind of things of me interacting with a lot of these worlds. And I love it because, again, I can help tell their stories, unlike able-bodied people, because I've been there. I know what they're going through. I'll ask those insensitive questions that you might be afraid to ask. People just, I don't want to offend him. They would never say, well, can you have sex? Have you had a relationship? The things that I could get into and delve into because I've been a part of it. Some journalists are afraid to ask that. So I'm not, and I'm cool with it. If I'm that ambassador to the disabled community, then I surely enjoy it.
So that's actually, I do have a couple of questions that I know. I remember one time when I served a mission for my church, and there was a guy who I roomed with for a while who he didn't have an arm. He lost it in an accident, but he mentioned, he talked about phantom pain in his arm, even though it's not there. Do you have that? Like, are there times where you feel like?
No, but I think because, my lower body is on the ground, and I have kind of a flipper with 4 toes and another little flipper with 2 toes. They're extremely sensitive, I think, because all my nerve endings are much closer to my brain and everything. So I'm highly susceptible to tickling and pain. And when I stub them, it's everybody's like, "Oh, you're overreacting." I'm like, "No, I'm not." When I'm rolling around holding something, screaming and swearing, like a Family Guy episode. But I don't have any of those kind of issues. I have the rotator cuff pain. And this I've had this rotator cuff fixed 3 times, and my left one done once, and this one is actually completely, it's gone. And the doctors have said they could try to rebuild one or take a cadaver and try to attach it, but they said within 3 or 4 years, it's just going to rip because you're not supposed to walk on your arms and your shoulders, and that's why they've told me to cut back on sports and being active. But I still like to be able to go out and play a little softball or play a catch with my sons, or do those kind of things that just being around the kids at the baseball camps, being able to walk on my hands and being able to do those kind of things. Again, trying to lead by example. So these kids say, look, like I know legs can do it. I'm going to get up out of my wheelchair and try to stand, or I'm going to try to do this or that.
Yeah. Your sons, how old are they?
20, 18, and 16.
Oh, wow. So you got three of them. So they're just wrecking everything in your house.
They are, I'm so lucky. The only thing they fight over is baseball, because one's a Phillies fan, one's a Red Sox fan, and one's a Yankees fan, and I'm a Twins fan. So we are all messed up. But it is, I'm so proud. It's the greatest thing I've done, and that's the other thing. I've tried to give them as much of a normal life as I can as a parent. When I raised them, because my ex-wife she worked during the day, so I would stay home during the day and do the daycare of the kids, and then I would work at ESPN either 3 to 12 or 6 to 3 at night. Mm-hmm. And so I had to do the stuff of figuring out how to get him out of the bassinet and dress him and get him in the stroller and get him in the car seat and do all that without legs, without getting them hurt or dropping them. But the cool thing is my kids learned their independence quicker because they began to help me. They would figure out we could both climb the stairs and get down on our butts and go down. And it was a safer way, rather than them stumbling and falling. And so like they have turned into 3 amazing young men. I couldn't be prouder. I don't have horror stories of any arrests or burglaries or pregnancies or any of those kind of things. And I'm just very, it's my proudest moment. And I live vicariously through them. They all played baseball. It was kind of neat. My middle one, Tate, just is now a freshman in college. He was one of the state's best catchers, and he looks like me. He was just defined like me. He's got my perverted sense of humor like me. And it was like watching my mini me, and you could live vicariously. Oh, so that's what I might have looked like had I had legs, just to kind of live that way. It's really kind of a cool feeling. It's really proud.
Yeah, I have 4 kids, 2 boys, 2 girls, and my son just graduated high school. He started his first year of college. He's doing community college here, and he's going to serve a mission for our church next summer. And it's the same thing. You watch him, and it's so funny. The thing I love about kids is how they're all so different, but at the same time, though, every once in a while you catch glimpses of yourself in them. And my oldest son is like that. He doesn't want to admit it, but he's got some of my qualities, and I'm like, I don't know if that's a good thing, but
one of my coolest moments, my sons had me go to the Outer Banks with them so they could take their friends, because they weren't old enough to rent the house. So we went to the Outer Banks, and when my son Tate, who's also a cook, was making breakfast, he's cranking 80s tunes, and I'm hearing Wham, and I'm hearing George Michael, and I'm like, did I do that to him? But it's so cool because we share this bond. And he goes, yeah, Dad, did you know my favorite group was Hall & Oates? And I'm like, I love Hall & Oates. And you don't realize by osmosis, maybe it was too many hours of the 80s on 8 on Sirius XM in my car when we were young. But, those are those glimmers that you say, that it's just kind of cool. Like, once I'm gone, once you're gone, they're going to have a little bit of you to carry that on.
Yeah, that's what you hope for. I was recently talking to my son. We took a trip. I told all my kids, I said, when you graduate high school, you get 1 week anywhere you want with me. And we ended up going out to the Olympics in Paris. And we spent some time out there. And I told them, I go, listen, as a parent, all I ask is, I don't do everything right. But the things I do right, I hope you emulate them. And the things I do wrong, do something different. That's all I can ask, and he's doing it. It's really great to see. And so for these last few minutes that I have you, I usually have 3 questions that I ask everybody, and they're kind of existential, but I'm going to ask them. What would you say is your biggest success in life?
Me? I mean, just kind of overcoming and beating the odds and defying what you label somebody with a disability to be. So again, you look at that resume and you go, okay, college football, minor league baseball, Emmys, ESPN, and then ... has no legs. What? Yeah. What am I looking at? That's not even possible. So I think, I guess the body of work that I hope isn't over yet. Hopefully some bigger and greater things ahead. But I would say just kind of everything. I know that's too vague, but it just, if you look at what, from adoption, getting your mother never saw, they took me away, she said, with a blanket. She never even saw me. And then boom, I could have been in those days. I don't know if you are aware, they still had institutions for people with disabilities, which was like a kind of a mental hospital where they would just put people if they were disabled and the state didn't want them, they just kind of went to these hospitals. That was just a horrible thing. So I was lucky that I got adopted. So again, I'd say overcoming the odds of defining of what, people might think I should have lived.
Yeah, and that's the thing that's so fascinating is you had so many things that if you didn't make it, people would look at it and go, "I get it," right? But you didn't
At
let that
least he
stop you.
tried. Yeah.
Yeah,
There you go.
right. But that's the thing, right? Is that I think that the most impressive stories are the ones where everyone would understand why you quit and you don't. That's what makes success. Is
I don't know if you saw the movie I'm in on Netflix called Saint a Second Chances. If you haven't, it's a great baseball documentary, but it tells the story of Mike Veck, who owned the St. Paul Saints and had the famous father who owned the White Sox. But there's a 10-minute segment of Darryl Strawberry and I, and if you see that segment, it's to your point. People will get it because Darryl said he was ready to quit baseball and walk away that day. He walked out on the field and saw a guy without legs who had a love and a passion for baseball, and it reinvigorated him. And the next thing you know, he's hitting home runs and playing in a World Series later that year for the Yankees.
Yeah.
So if we can make an impact, if one person can make an impact like I did, and with what you have with this show, if people hear this or your past episodes and they're motivated and inspired, then we're doing our jobs. We're leaving what I call my legacy. I like to leave my legacy for people to realize that, again, if a guy like me can overcome those odds and defy what society labels a certain person as, then there's no excuse for those guys to at least go out and try and do it.
Definitely. Next question. What is your biggest failure in life and what did you learn from it?
I think that's a good question. Do I say love? Because, dating sometimes in youth, especially with disability, as we talked about, the women are all looking for, when you had your roommate, they're looking for that 6'2" quarterback, blonde, blue-eyed. They're not looking for a teenage or 20-year-old legless guy. And so, I think those biggest failures early was trying to work so hard to be accepted by a female, or trying to be different from who I am, or but as we mature as a society, people mature, and so it gets better. But I would say that love life early was one of the biggest failures, just because, again, they were judging me by not having legs, but they could go out and dance with people, they could go out and do these things that I couldn't always do.
Interesting. Now, the last question I have is, at some point, we hope 20, 30 years from now, right? You're going to pass away and there'll be a funeral and then someone will give a eulogy. What is the one thing you hope that somebody says in your eulogy?
Wow. That he was normal, that he was just like everybody else.
Yeah.
And he never took no for an answer and never used the word can't. And that pretty much sums it up. I didn't play sports to, get to where I got. I just played sports because I loved them, and they ended up getting me somewhere. And if I didn't have those, I don't know where I would be, but I'm so thankful that I had some sort of ability despite having a disability, and I never gave up. I never quit. I never took no for an answer. If I had I don't know where I'd be.
Well, I want to push back on you a little bit and say you're not normal, but that's a good thing. What I mean by that,
I am crazy. Yeah.
But what I mean by that is that normal people are average. You're not. Normal people can become amazing, right? Because they do things that normal people aren't willing to do. Normal people aren't normal, quote unquote, normal people don't do any of the things that you've done, let alone people with disabilities. So I would say you're definitely not normal, and that's a great thing. I mean,
well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah,
it's a good way to look at it. Yeah, I'm not good with the compliments and the accolades because, again, I never sought out to do that.
Yeah.
But it's very moving when people, appreciate my body of work. And that's all as I say, I want to leave that legacy. So in 20 or 30 years, they remember and they go, hey, you want to be inspired? Look at what this guy overcame, or look what he did despite the odds, or look what his sons ended up doing, those kind of things.
Yeah. So if people want to follow you and follow your work, where can they find you?
Oh, thank you. Yes. DaveStevensSpeaks.com is the website for motivational speaking. And then Dave Stevens Speaks on Instagram, Facebook. I don't do much Twitter or X or whatever it's called. What is it? LinkedIn, YouTube. And then I've got a podcast on your home TV called The Gary Stein and Stevens Show, which is mostly celebrities and athletes and sports people and stuff that a lot of ex-ESPNers come on, and we have a lot of fun. We had Donnie Most from Happy Days on. We get all kinds of fun, obscure people sometimes that you haven't heard from in a long time. We're about to have the dad from the Wonder Years coming on in an episode in a couple of weeks. So Dan Loria. Awesome. So I'm brushing up on my "What would you do if I sang attitude?"
I love that show. Such a good one. That's awesome. So great.
Thank you. Yeah, and like I said, if they could like it and share, I'm not about the clicks. But my content is, to much to your point, I'm showing people with disabilities that are overcoming things, or I'm championing those causes, or I'm a part of amazing events, and they can see that there are many of us out there, and we just need that chance.
Absolutely. Well, awesome. Well, for those of you who've listened, follow Dave, follow us, subscribe. Dave, it's been a pleasure to talk with you. Let's do it again sometime.
Absolutely. Anytime. Thank you so much.
All right. We'll see you.